Hey, what's up, guys? I'm here to make a tier list of the Cradle series. This is definitely just my opinion. Um, I'm expecting it won't be too controversial, but you never know when it comes to the internet. Also, I have no idea why, but my webcam is stuck in black and white. Uh, I spent too long trying to fix it, and I gave up. So enjoy old school remix. So anyway, uh, I plan to talk about all of my choices for each grade. Feel free to leave comments and flame me if you disagree. I would appreciate you telling me why you disagree, though, because that creates more conversation. And I kind of want this to be a discussion. Um, yeah, without further ado, we'll just start off. I'll go in order of the series as it came out. So we'll start with Unsold, and from the top down, I would rate this higher, but I'm gonna rate this as if I hadn't read anything yet, and I think Unsold on its own is C. It's definitely passable. It's a good book, but on its own, I'm not sure that it can be considered amazing or groundbreaking. It's very um, cookie cutter feeling, and it doesn't. In regards to a lot of other fantasy books, the climax isn't as much. There's a lot of promises that are made in the first book, which I think is why people continue to read, because of Serial and the prospect of Lyndon just advancing. But he doesn't even make it to Copper in the first book, and it makes the title good, but it also makes it kind of anticlimactic at the end. Even though you get to see Yaren advance to gold, I think that maybe maybe from like if we were to go back, in my opinion, I think it might have been better to have Lyndon at least end up at Copper. That's not the only issue I have with the series. I think the writing is a little weaker in the first book, but it's still good. And definitely going back after having read the rest of the series, I would probably place it into B tier. But as a standalone book, I'm gonna leave it in C tier. So yeah. So next we have Soulsmith. I'm rating Soulsmith as an A. Soulsmith is way more intriguing to me because it kind of expands both the universe, the magic system, and the characters all at once. There's a lot more than just Lyndon and Yaren that are super interesting. Of course, there's um, Kelsa, but yeah, I'm not sure that I'm going back to talking about Unsold. We're talking about Soulsmith. So Soulsmith was for me a big leap, and that's what really hooked me into the series. Um, I liked Athen's introduction as a character. It provided a lot more comic relief, and then a lot more intrigue, like what's going on with the marble kind of thing. And then yeah, learning more about the magic system and seeing how the sacred arts plays a role in the wider world, as opposed to just the Sacred Valley area. Yeah, not much left to say about Soulsmith other than that. That and the stakes, other than the far off stakes of Lyndon's home being destroyed in 30 years, you kind of get more short term stakes when it comes to stuff like Jai Long toward the end of the book, and it really kind of keeps you reading. I really wanted to get right into Black Flame, whereas after Unsold, I would say I wasn't feeling an urgent need to find out what happened next. So yeah, um, very good book, and the writing is stronger. It's already starting to get stronger. I think Will's writing um, kind of takes a huge leap forward for the first 3 or 4 books. So that'll be a trend. But so then we go to Black Flame. Um, it's really hard to place Black Flame. If I could give it a B plus, I would do that, I think. But I don't think it belongs in B tier. I think it's worse than Soulsmith, but um, but still an A tier. It's the writing is a lot better, even more so than in Soulsmith. I think Will really comes into his own in Black Flame. Some things that I didn't like about it were um, it's hard to say that I didn't like it, but I guess I just didn't feel as educated. Like it was really hard to figure out what was going on toward the end of the book with his advancement and whatnot. It just seemed like it was very jarring at some points. But that's a very minor kind of nitpick. There's definitely enough description in there to get the gist of what was going on. Expanding on learning more about gold and like the different stages between low gold and true gold and like what it really means. And you start to kind of toy with the idea of an Underlord and like what the difference is with an Underlord. You learn a little bit more about Soulfire. I think that the world building in this book is very good, and you learn a lot more about Athan, or you get more questions than answers with Athan, but there's even more in there that kind of uh, brings the intrigue along with him as a character. And then you learn more about the Aurelius Empire in general. So I think that um, Black Flame is very good and definitely deserves to be an A tier. So moving on to Skysworn. Skysworn, I if I had stopped the series at Skysworn, I think I would have rated it a C. A lot of people really like Skysworn, and I definitely liked it, but I wouldn't put it at the top of my list like a lot of people, including I think Banfius actually would put Skysworn at the top of his list. For me, Skysworn, not enough happened. It was very horizontal, very good for world building, um, but I think as far as driving the story and the narrative toward the climax that we now know is Waybound, I felt like Skysworn kind of teetered off a little bit. Um, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Like in hindsight, Skysworn was a very necessary book, and I think this probably just it might be a pitfall of um, writing such a short book. Like maybe if you combined Skysworn and Ghostwater in a more traditional kind of fantasy novel that's a lot longer, then I think it could have been maybe higher. But on its own, I think not enough happens in Skysworn, in my opinion. There's some more character introduction and a lot of world building, and it's definitely well written. And yeah, it's a good book. I just can't say that it's one of my favorites for all of those reasons. So next we go to Ghostwater, and it's unequivocally the first S tier. Ghostwater for me had the right combination of everything. The writing was great. The action was insane. So much happened in the book, but you still had time to learn. Lyndon learned a lot more about himself. We encountered Dross, who is one of my favorite characters. We get a lot of character growth out of Lyndon. We get some nitpicks I have, or maybe we get a little less out of Yaren here. Um, but only so much can happen in such a small number of pages, right? Um, and yeah, so if there was a uh, one thing wrong with it is that maybe some more stuff with Yaren could have happened, but I don't think that even that point I feel like could be refuted. I have very little bad things to say about Ghostwater, which is why it is where it is. And yeah, so now we will go to Underlord. Underlord is better than Skysworn, but still a B tier for me. Um, Underlord felt slower than the other books, but the stakes were definitely higher, especially with Yaren and her lifeline nearly being lost. I felt like the characters like Seishin Daji and uh, pretty much everything about the Saishins, I just didn't feel like the characters kind of felt like they were thrown in there, and of course we hadn't encountered them before until this point, but it just felt like their introduction was a little stilted, and they were there for the purpose of Lyndon and Yaren advancing, and maybe that's kind of the point from the character perspective. I think like they're put in Nightwheel Valley for the purpose of advancing, but it just felt a little off to me. I love the end of the book, but I think just the way that we got to the end maybe knocked it down a peg for me. Yeah. Yeah. So now we go to Uncrowned. Uncrowned for me is uh, A tier. I'm trying to put it in front of Soulsmith. I think it's better than Soulsmith by a little bit. Uncrowned for me, I would put it in S tier if I weren't trying to rate these as individual books and not knowing what happens afterward. Um, but yeah, so Uncrowned, the only thing wrong with it, I think everybody can agree, was that it didn't include the entire tournament. And Will had his reasons for doing that, and I still think that having it end with Lyndon losing and having it be kind of like that cliffhanger, really good for making me want to read the next book, but as far as having the book feel complete, definitely is why I don't have it in S tier. Um, yeah, so other than that, I loved it. I loved being able to learn more about characters from different areas. I love the interactions that Lyndon had with the other Black Flame Dragon, and we learn more about Mercy, and then of course the fight between Yaren and Lyndon that we wouldn't get if it wasn't inside of a tournament was amazing. It was really cool to see them go at it, um, and yeah, so that's why I rated it an A. Um, there might be a trend with the the last four books here. So next we have Winter Steel. Winter Steel is S tier. Um, I would say Winter Steel is the first book that surprised me more than once. Finding out about this, basically we had this progression from the very beginning to the end of the Uncrowned, where if Lyndon and Yaren are advancing, they're advancing to the next stage, and we already knew what the next stage was. That had kind of been laid out, right? From Underlord, you go to Overlord. From Overlord, you go to Archlord or Archlord, whatever. And then Sage or Herald, and then Monarch. But we kind of Lyndon broke the mold, and so did Yaren, in two different ways, and that kind of like, this is a huge turning point for the rest of the series where things don't go quite as expected, and it's much harder to guess what's going to happen. And I think that kind of catapulted it on its own, on top of the writing being immaculate and having a lot of payoff start to happen, starting with Winter Steel. And I think Winter Steel is also really good because it kind of leaves you, at the end of it, it leaves your imagination open. So while you're waiting for Bloodline, you're like, oh man, Lyndon's going to go back to Sacred Valley, and who knows what's going to happen, but it's going to be awesome. The anticipation for Bloodline, I think, was probably at its peak as far as the entire series, other than maybe now waiting for the last book. But waiting for Bloodline, I can remember, felt longer just because of how much we expected to happen after the end of Winter Steel. So next we have Bloodline, of course. Also S tier. I'm not sure if I would put it in front of or behind Winter Steel. I think it's hard because there's a lot of payoff in Bloodline, and there's a lot more information in Bloodline that we've been craving as readers, right? We learn more about Sage powers and like how that all works. We learn we get to see Lyndon go back to Sacred Valley and kick everybody's ass, or at least partially kick everybody's ass. And he interacts with his parents, and we get more from the romance that's kind of happening between Lennon and Yaren. Even though we have the scene of them kissing in Winter Seal, I forgot to mention that. But we get more about the relationship after the fact. So there's a lot of payoff that we've been waiting for a very long time, and then some from the last book as well in Bloodline. So for me, Bloodline is even, now that I'm thinking about it, I think I like Bloodline more than I like Ghostwater. So um, yeah, so Bloodline so far, best book in my opinion. Um, so next we have Reaper. Reaper is going. Oh, this is hard. I don't know. When I was reading Reaper, when I finished it, the day I finished it, it was my favorite book. When I've reread the series, hmm, still don't know. I think Reaper is interchangeable with Bloodline, in my opinion. We finally find out about Athan. Uh, there's been tons of people that thought or even knew, uh, in their heart of hearts, they knew that Athan was Osriel, right? But man, that him like the marble shattering, him coming out of it, like removing the cloak or whatever, and like regaining the mantle of Reaper. That was definitely like goosebump inducing. Um, Seeing the world like come to an end, seeing Lyndon go toe to toe with a monarch for the first time, sort of. You're wondering what's going to happen with Dross. Um, just so many things are all coming together. It was like a very, very climactic book. The series could have even ended at Reaper, so to speak. We've known it's going to be 12 books, but it just felt like everything was falling apart. Then everything was coming together. There was a lot of ups and downs in Reaper, and it also sets us up for Dreadgod so well. Like you really, really, just like with the end of Winter Steel, Reaper is kind of like a miniature Winter Steel. Like, what the heck's gonna happen? Ethan's gone, right? Nobody knows. Like, he definitely didn't plan that. If he was planning everything beforehand, now all of that's out the window. Nobody knows what's gonna happen, and we need Dreadgod now, right? So, like I said, it's very hard to pick between these two, but they're both insanely good books. Um, so now we have Dreadgod. To me, Dreadgod goes here. Um, when I first read it, of course, it was my favorite book. I think that's just going to happen every time I read these because there's a bias. But after rereading the series, um, I don't really care for the cliffhanger. Some of the cliffhangers are good, but I don't like it when things don't feel quite wrapped up. And it felt like a very arbitrary place to stop the book, other than the fact that Lyndon had these Dread God powers and uh, the whole announcement worldwide that he was basically being treated as a Dread God now. So their ties are cut with pretty much everybody, other than their little group of five, six, yeah, six. Um, it just was, yeah. Thinking about how, like, why I don't think it's quite as good as Reaper and stuff is mainly just due to that ending. But everything else in this book, it just hit so hard. It was great. I loved the action between the Silent King and Lyndon, and then Emrys Silentborn saying "Here, kitty, kitty." Um, it was nuts. I loved Dread God. Love the series. I'm really looking forward to Waybound. Hopefully, you guys checked out Bamf's video earlier today about what he thinks will happen in Waybound. I think he's much better at guessing than I am. So yeah, that's my tier list. Please let me know what you think. Um, and thanks for watching.